From the University of Constance in Germany, and I will chair this session. By the way, this session is a good choice because we have one best paper and one honorable mention awarded paper in this session, and congratulations to the authors that have done a great job. And we will start with the paper about fluid grouping, which is a best paper award, and I will ask Florian to join us. Florian Block, he will present this paper, and this paper has a lot of co-authors, as you can see. James Hammerman, Michael Horn, Army Spiegel, Jonathan Christiansen, Brenda Phillips, Judy Diamond, Margaret Evans, and Chia Shen. And they all have done a great job because they got now a lot of nice awards. Best paper awards, so congratulations. And don't forget to make use of our nice mobile app for this conference to vote for the best presentation. We have 4 possibilities here to give your votes. And now, Florian, please start with your presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Of course, I share the honor with all these co-authors. There was a very collaborative effort across many institutions. And this all came out of a 4-year NSF-funded project called Life on Earth. And in this project, we designed several multi-touch exhibits on evolutionary biology together with 4 partner museums. And you can also look at our apps online on the ANOVA labs, just released this week. And this work is about an evaluation that we've done in one of our busy partner museum, the California Academy of Science. So multi-touch tabletops have really, so informal education has really emerged as one of the promising application areas of multi-touch tabletops because they afford this group interaction and this social interaction that people seek when they go to museums. And a lot of work has looked at how people engage in this context. And if you look at prior work along 2 axes, on the left, qualitative studies, on the right, quantitative ones, and then look at the settings of more controlled or lab studies at the top, and then in the wild studies, you'll find that the bulk of work lies in either of those 2 sectors. So you've got a set of in the wild qualitative studies, and you've got some quantitative analyses of group engagement that takes place in the lab. But we wanted to contribute to this sector, and there is some stuff here, so we know, for instance, what gestures people use. We know how long groups interact in walk up and use scenarios. But really, we don't know how factors really influence group engagement. We know what the factors are. We know that group size certainly is a factor, including groups of 1, so single people versus groups of 2 and larger. We also know that age composition plays a role in how people interact. We know, for instance, that mixed groups seem to interact differently than, for instance, only adults. And we also know that when strangers get together, that there are things happening when groups overlap that influences how they engage. And what we wanted to contribute is to quantify the effect of these factors on group engagement, and wants to do so in an ecologically valid environment. And so this was our rough study design. I'll be talking about each of these. First about the application types. So those were the 2 types we've developed over 2 years, and they've been on display in each of our 4 partner museums since 2013. So the first is what we call the deep tree, and it's an interactive visualization of the tree of life with over 70,000 species and 20,000 internal nodes. And it's a very open-ended, free choice activity, so people can navigate the space, explore their favorite species, and see how they're related in evolutionary history. And so you can zoom in, and you get this flying experience. And then we had this build a tree game in which you reconstruct. It's like a puzzle game. You reconstruct the phylogenetic history of certain species, and it gets progressively harder. So it's a level-based game. But the important thing here is that those were the 2 different types of application: open-ended free choice exhibit and a game-like activity. And so we also used 2 different study methods. So in the left one, you see we videotaped how people engaged with the exhibit, and for that we had to obtain consent because there are children around, so we had the area cordoned off. But after giving consent, people could freely go in and out. But we also wanted to use a less obtrusive observational method, so shadowing, in which people just walk up to a live exhibit, so unrestricted, as they would normally, and then people, evaluation staff, in real-time codes engagement. And so we looked at 629 visitors, and we collected 3 different data sets spread within that space. I'll talk about the rationale in a bit, but for each of these data sets, we roughly did the same thing. We recorded when people arrived and when they left, which gave us the dwell time. We estimated an age category, and we coded how much of the percent during their presence at the table that perceived certain social engagement measures. So this included 2 people manipulating the exhibit at the same time, or taking turns, or buy a talk. And you can read about the methodology in the paper. So we derived sort of the percentage for each of those measures per visitor, and so what we get is an age category, dwell time, and 9 engagement measures. So those are the percentages that I was talking about. They're physical, verbal, and affective. So now we've got individual level data, but from a statistical point, of course, there's a problem here that there's a large amount of dependence in that data. Because people overlap, they influence each other. These values cannot be considered independent samples, and so many of the analyses that we commonly use in ANOVA's correlation cannot be applied to this level of data. So what we need is a process to convert this into group level data. And so in acquired value, it's fairly straightforward to detect groups based on the idle time that separates them. But if you get into more busy venues, things are less clear-cut. So you've got this visitor flow that's in flux that changes all the time. So one thing we've contributed in this paper is an algorithm that groups people based on shared experience. And what we mean by that is mutual overlap in time. So we are looking for clusters of visitors who have spent most of their time together at the table. And when I say most, I mean more than 50%. So we're looking at the predominant experience they've had. Right, so with this algorithm, you can automatically identify what we call exclusive groups. So those are our group level units. And you can also identify certain special types of visitors. So this one, number 1, is a connector. And connector do not spend most of their time in a stable group configuration, but connect with many different other groups. So they're eliminated from some of the analyses for that reason, but they're included because they have to be taken into account when you characterize the other groups. So for instance, the orange group has to be counted as a group of size 4 and as a mixed group. But when you aggregate our engagement measures, so the dwell time and the social engagement, you have to only average to only average them over the period that they were at the table, so this gives you the most representative measure, so you get the group level measure. And then you can also calculate a percentage of the time that this group overlapped with other members, other groups, so you get this, you can quantify this overlap ratio. So now we've managed to get our data into a group level structure, and the rationale for this design was that by taking a constant application but varying the observational methods, so video and naturalistic observation methods, we can observe the effect of the observational method. And then for our actual characterization of group engagement, we can then take our 2 data sets that most closely resemble the context in which applications are actually used. And if we find effects that go across both applications, it suggests a more general applicability of our results. So first we look at the effect of the study type, so the video versus the shadowing. And you see right off the bat, the sample that you get is very different. So the video is skewed towards larger group sizes and more only adult groups, which is probably because of the consent procedures, but you start off with a very different sample. And so in terms of engagement times, you get a dramatically increased time in the video condition, 6 minutes, which is almost a 5-fold increase to the naturalistic, which is 1.2 minutes. And looking At the distribution, you can see that the naturalistic curve is more what a normal exhibit, what you would expect from a normal exhibit. So most people do not spend more than 2 minutes at the exhibit. And for the video, it's sort of flattened out, which leads to this inflation of engagement times. But at this point, I feel compelled to say that so our exhibits, 28% of all groups stayed longer than 3 minutes. And 3 minutes is in museum context is considered very good result. And 12% stay longer than 4 minutes, and another 5% still spent more than 9 minutes. I'm saying that because this really is very competitive and probably better than most traditional exhibit, which is encouraging for us designing a digital exhibit that this open-endedness can lead to very, very good engagement. Now, we wanted to compare we wanted to measure the effect of study type on our social engagement. And what we found was that in the video condition, you find these more quote-unquote orderly interactions, so more turn-taking and more pointing. Significantly less how to talk, so maybe people were hesitant to out themselves as not understanding the system. And on the other hand, you have significantly more instances of simultaneous interaction in the naturalistic setting, which just shows that this is just a little bit more messy. And now, because of these stark differences between the video study, the video data, and the naturalistic data, we decided that for most of our characterization, we'll focus on our naturalistic data sets, with an eye on the video study for comparison. So we ran an ANOVA with 3 factors: group size, age composition, and app type. And there was no significant effect of app type, which means that all the results I'll show you will be were observed across both applications. Okay, so in our naturalistic study, we found that groups of the size of 1, so single users, and groups of 3 spend roughly the same amount of time at the exhibit. There was no significant difference. But groups of 2 spend almost twice as much time there. So that points to a special size in terms of engagement. And sort of, even unsurprisingly, but maybe a hint to why groups of 3 aren't staying as long, is because there's significantly more instances of people manipulating at the same time, which may be indicative of conflict. In the video condition, there was no significant effect of group size. Now, age composition, we found that adult-only groups and groups mixing children and adults spend roughly the same amount of time, so no significant difference here. But groups with only children spend significantly less time than both of these other compositions. And that just goes to show that as soon as you add the adult to the mix, it raises the bar of engagement. And not only that, you get more pointing, bio-talk, how to talk, and enjoyment, which just goes to show for the moderating influence that adults have on the experience of children. Compared to just adults, you have more preventing touch, simultaneous interaction, negotiation, which just shows that things just get a little bit more messy when kids are there, and that's fine. Again, there was no significant effect in the video condition. Now, we also wanted to look at the effect of overlap, so see whether the more people overlap, do they maybe spend shorter amount of time at the table. But in fact, in our naturalistic study, that was not the case, so there was no correlation, which means people did not cut their time at the table short, even if other groups joined. But the overall level of social engagement went up, so these points all went up. Interestingly, in the video condition, bear in mind the really inflated times of engagement, there was a negative correlation. So the more people overlap, the less time they spend at the exhibit, which probably is also because under observation, you're more ready to give up space to a new group. And we also want to look at how social engagement correlated itself with dwell time. So we found that in the naturalistic study, dwell time positively correlated with turn-taking, pointing, bio-statement, bio-question, enjoyment. In the video condition, there was no such effect. But one thing that stood out to us here is that So much of our UI design for collaborative interfaces was targeted at creating these sort of simultaneous opportunities for simultaneous interaction. But in fact, that didn't positively correlate with the amount of time they spent at the exhibit. But turn-taking did, and that points to an interesting design recommendation, which I'll come to later. So now, in summary, we found that groups of two, in our naturalistic study setup, we found that groups of two, groups mixing children and adults, and groups who take turn tend to spend more time at the exhibit and engage verbally more with the underlying scientific concepts. And that, in stark contrast, none of this was observed in the video condition. So this leads us to go through a series of design implications. First, design for small groups, particularly groups of two, because those tend to spend most time at the exhibit. Also provide a meaningful single-user experience. Almost 40% of our groups in the naturalistic setting had the size 1, so single people. And to support these mixed age groups configuration, entwine playful elements and resources for advanced learners, so they both can benefit equally from the experience. And overlap is common, which means that take into account that people often join the exhibit when it's not in its initial state. And so, last but not least, you've seen that when you try to quantify engagement, research methodology greatly matters. So video is really important for qualitative analyses, of course, and it's also really important for training the coders, the real-time coders, and for establishing intercoder reliability. But we wouldn't have gotten representative results with just running our analysis on the video data. So take care of the obtrusiveness of your observational methods on the data collection. And with that, I want to again thank all the co-authors, and invite you to visit us online or in the museums. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Florian, for your nice presentation. And it's now time for asking questions. And don't forget, mention your name and your institution. Okay, I will start with the icebreaker question. No, there's somebody over there. Great.
Hi, I'm Fabio Morré from the University of Trento. And I was wondering if you consider the possibility that you had the best, like the couples spend more time rather than big groups. Maybe it's influenced also by the fact that the table was of that size, and also the interaction metaphor maybe was better just for a couple interaction. Yeah. Yes.
That may be a factor, although I have to say that the surface we used probably we've observed 3 people comfortably interacting alongside if they're at a slight angle on the side. But you know that we didn't look at table size as a factor, and I think that would be a fascinating study to conduct using that methodology. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question.
Hi, Tim Dwyer, Monash University. So, in your analysis, were you able to distinguish between groups of people who already knew each other versus people who were strangers to each other before they approached the table?
No, we weren't able to identify whether they knew each other or not. We were able to say whether people who did not spend most of their time together overlapped, right? So that's all part of our algorithm. So we cannot claim what you just, and I hope I didn't imply that.
Okay. Do you think that would have a significant effect on people's behavior and their grouping and their interaction and so forth?
It's very interesting. I mean, in a large museum, usually people who don't come together aren't together, I think. So I think probably the effect we measured is fairly representative. But I think overall it's interesting that people don't really care that much, or don't really seem to care that much if there's a new group approaching, but you know, sort of hold their standpoint. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yvonne Rogers, UCL. Really nice study, reflecting on the different methodology. I wonder if, having spent, I imagine, an inordinate amount of time doing this quantitative analysis, what you think you gain in terms of understanding and learnings compared to the qualitative analyses that have been done previously in naturalistic settings?
Well, I mean, I guess there's pros and cons for qualitative and quantitative work, right? I mean, quantitative just adds methodology. We contribute methodology that you can use. I just think it's nice, whereas I totally respect and like all the qualitative work in the field, it's nice to have a statistical confirmation that certain group characteristics seem to work better than others.
Okay, one last question, and you can prepare, please, your presentation.
Hello, my name is Seunggi Kim from KAIST, and thank you for the nice talk, and I think your contents are designed for the turn-taking situation, because people can only zoom into the one tree. So if the contents provide collaborative inputs, then will it be different? Will it come to different results?
Right. I mean, in principle, you're right. I didn't show the applications in details. Even the deep tree embedded frequent periods of collaborative or opportunity for collaborative input and side-by-side activity. Bear in mind, we also tested the builder tree application, so all the results we found across both. And builder tree really is a puzzle game, so nothing keeps anyone from interacting at any time, so 5 people can technically move the tokens at the same time.
Okay, thanks again to the speaker. Thanks, Florian. Great job.